She walked into that hotel ballroom, carrying a canvas tote bag from a grocery store. And the man at the door stopped her like she'd tried to walk through a wall. Not physically. He didn't touch her. But the way he looked at her, up, then down, then back up again, with that particular kind of slowness that isn't curiosity, it's judgment. That look said everything his mouth hadn't said yet. "This is a private event," he told her. Vivienne Okafor said, "I know. I'm on the guest list." He didn't check the list. He just looked at her tote bag and said, "The catering entrance is around back." She was 53 years old. She had built a company from a kitchen table in Scarborough. She was wearing a blazer that cost more than his monthly salary. And she stood there in the lobby of the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto, while the man decided, based on what he saw in 2 seconds, that she belonged in the back with the servers. If you think you know how this story ends, keep watching. Because what Vivienne Okafor did next had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with something far more dangerous to people like that man at the door. She smiled. She thanked him. And she walked away. Vivienne Okafor grew up in the Malvern neighborhood of Scarborough, which is the kind of place Toronto doesn't talk about at fundraising dinners, but needs desperately to understand. Her parents had come from Nigeria in 1979, with degrees that Canadian employers spent 20 years pretending not to recognize. Her father drove a cab. Her mother cleaned offices downtown, the same towers where the people at those desks would never learn her name. Vivienne watched all of it. She watched her mother spray press her uniform before every shift. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she said dignity wasn't something you waited for other people to give you. You brought it yourself, or you went without. She was a quiet girl in school. Not shy, quiet. There's a difference. Shy people are afraid. Vivienne was just paying attention. She studied accounting at Ryerson, back when it was still called that, graduating in the early 90s, into a recession that made everyone miserable and made young black women invisible in a particular way that took her years to name. She spent a decade at a mid-sized firm in the financial district, watching men with fewer qualifications and looser handshakes get promoted past her in a rhythm so consistent it almost felt choreographed. In 2004, she left. She started Okafor Capital Consulting out of the second bedroom of her house on Danforth Avenue, which was not a glamorous origin story. The desk was a door on 2 filing cabinets. The chair hurt her back. She took calls from clients while her kids did homework at the kitchen table. And she billed every hour like it was the last one she'd ever have. 15 years later, Okafor Capital managed nearly $300 million in client assets, with offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. She had been profiled in the Globe and Mail twice. She gave a TEDx talk in 2019 that had been viewed over 2 million times. She sat on the boards of 2 hospitals and a university. She did not own a designer bag. She drove a Subaru. She kept the grocery store tote because it was useful, and because she had long since stopped dressing for anyone else's comfort. This matters. Because what happened at the Fairmont Royal York in November of 2023 was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And the man at the door was just the opening act. The event was the annual gala for the Hartwell Foundation, one of the country's largest private philanthropic organizations focused on housing equity across urban Canada. Vivienne had been invited not as a donor, though she was one, but as a featured speaker. She was to address the room of roughly 400 guests, most of them wealthy, most of them white, all of them there because they believed, at least officially, in making Canadian cities more livable for the people being priced out of them. The man at the door was named Preston Caldwell. He was the head of events and venue operations for the Hartwell Foundation, a title that had apparently convinced him he was the last line of defense between the ballroom and the wrong sort of people. Vivienne did not make a scene. She walked to the registration table on her own, gave her name to the volunteer there. A young woman who found it immediately and handed over a lanyard with "Featured Speaker" printed in gold, and walked into the ballroom without looking back at Preston Caldwell once. She found her assigned seat at the head table, set her tote bag on the chair beside her, and accepted a glass of water from a server who smiled at her like a human being. 30 minutes later, Preston Caldwell walked to the head table to introduce himself to the evening speakers. He extended his hand to the man on Vivienne's left, then to the woman on her right. Then his eyes moved past Vivienne to the empty chair beyond her, and he kept moving. She watched him do it. The man on her left, Dr. Ewan McAllister, a housing economist from the University of British Columbia, watched him do it too, and looked at Vivienne with an expression she recognized immediately. The expression that said, "Did that just happen?" And the smaller expression underneath it, "I'm sorry, I don't know what to say." She had gotten very good at reading that second expression. She'd been reading it her whole career. "It's fine," she told Dr. McAllister quietly. It was not fine. But she had a speech to give, and she had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing in the room is almost never the loudest thing. Preston Caldwell did not know who Vivienne Okafor was. This requires some explanation, because the Hartwell Foundation had been in contact with her office for 3 months to arrange the speaking engagement. Her name was on every planning document, every email chain, every printed agenda for the evening. Her bio was in the program, sitting on every seat in that ballroom. But Preston Caldwell dealt with logistics. He dealt with caterers and audiovisual crews and parking arrangements and linen orders. He had not, it seems, found time to read the program, or the speaker bios, or apparently the guest list he was supposedly consulting at the front door. What he saw at the door was a black woman in her 50s with a canvas tote bag arriving alone at a formal event. What he saw at the head table was a woman who did not fit the image he carried in his head of what a featured speaker looked like. And so he shook hands with Dr. McAllister. He shook hands with Josephine Tremblay-Cote, the Foundation's chair from Montreal. He shook hands with a city councilor from Ottawa, whose name Vivienne couldn't remember. And he moved past her like she was furniture. She gave her speech at 8:15. 18 minutes, no notes. She talked about her mother cleaning those towers downtown. She talked about what it costs a family when they can't afford to live within an hour of where they work. She talked about the money in that room and what it could do if it moved with urgency instead of caution. She was direct in a way that made some people uncomfortable and made others lean forward in their seats, like something they'd been waiting to hear had finally arrived. She received a standing ovation, partial but real, maybe 200 of the 400, which for a room full of people in formal wear and open bars is actually remarkable. Preston Caldwell began to understand what he had done somewhere around the 3rd minute of that speech. You could see it, people said later. The stillness that came over him. The way he stopped moving around the room. He stood near the back with his clipboard, and he listened to Vivienne Okafor speak, and his face went through several quiet calculations that had nothing charitable in them. After the applause, when the program moved to dinner service, and the room loosened into conversation, he came to the head table. He extended his hand to Vivienne. "Miss Okafor," he said, "I'm Preston Caldwell. I want to apologize for the confusion at the entrance earlier. I'm afraid I didn't recognize you." She looked at his hand for 1 beat, 2 beats, then she looked up at him. "I wasn't confused," she said. "Were you?" She did not shake his hand. She turned back to the conversation she had been having with Josephine Tremblay-Cote, and Preston Caldwell was left standing at the edge of the head table, with his hand still out, and nothing to put it down on except the truth of what he'd done. The dinner went on. The wine was good. The desserts were those little tower things that look impressive and taste like nothing. Vivienne talked with Josephine Tremblay-Cote about the Foundation's 5-year strategy, which was ambitious in the way that institutional plans sometimes are, full of language about transformation, while being carefully insulated from any risk of actual disruption. Josephine was smart and genuinely committed, Vivienne thought. The Foundation had done real work. The gala was not the cynical exercise some of these events were. But there was a distance between the ambitions on paper and the willingness to move with the speed those ambitions required. And that gap interested her, because it was where money could do the most good if placed correctly. She had come that evening with something more than a speech. In her tote bag, the grocery store tote that Preston Caldwell had used to dismiss her, was a folder, 14 pages, single-spaced, with 3 appendices. It was a proposal for a partnership between Okafor Capital and the Hartwell Foundation. A 10-year commitment to fund affordable housing development across 6 Canadian cities to the sum of $40 million. She had spent 4 months preparing it. Her senior team had stress-tested every number. The legal framework had been reviewed twice. It was, without exaggeration, the most significant philanthropic commitment she had ever put in writing. She had planned to leave it with Josephine Tremblay-Cote before the end of the evening. At 9:45, while the room was moving toward the exits, Preston Caldwell appeared again. He had clearly been thinking about the conversation at the head table, or the non-conversation, more accurately, and had decided to try again. "Miss Okafor," he said, and there was something newly careful in his voice. The tone of a man who has realized he is in a problem and is trying to manage it. "I hope the evening has been enjoyable, despite the earlier mix-up. The Foundation values your partnership enormously, as I'm sure you know." "I don't think we've been partners," Vivienne said pleasantly. "I've been a speaker and a donor." "That's different." "Of course, yes. I only meant, Mr. Caldwell." She picked up her tote bag. "I want to make sure I understand something. When I arrived this evening, you directed me to the catering entrance. Is that correct?" He went a particular color that Vivienne had seen before on people who have been caught, and are hoping the light is bad enough to hide it. There was a misunderstanding about, that's a yes or no question. A long pause. "Yes," he said. "And when you came to greet the speakers at the head table, you shook hands with everyone at the table except me. Is that also correct?" Another pause. "I wasn't aware at that point that you were, that I was what?" He didn't answer. She looked at him steadily, the way her mother used to look at things she was deciding about. Not hard, not angry, just clear-eyed and completely without hurry. "I'm going to find Josephine," she said. "Thank you for the evening." She walked across the emptying ballroom, past the tables where servers were already clearing glasses, and she found Josephine Tremblay-Cote near the coat check, talking to a board member from Vancouver. They spoke for 7 minutes. Vivienne told Josephine what had happened at the door, and at the head table, matter-of-factly, without drama. Josephine's face did what faces do when something lands that should have been prevented. Then Vivienne told Josephine that she had come prepared to propose a $40 million partnership, and that she was going to need some time before she made a final decision about whether that proposal was going where she had intended. She put the folder back in the tote bag. She shook Josephine's hand, warmly, genuinely, and she left. 3 days later, Vivienne received a call from Josephine Tremblay-Cote, followed immediately by a call from the Foundation's board chair, a Bay Street lawyer named Clifford Abbots, who spoke in complete sentences and full paragraphs and clearly expected everyone else to wait patiently while he assembled them. He expressed the Foundation's profound regret. He used the word unacceptable 4 times. He told her that Preston Caldwell had been placed on administrative leave pending a review. She thanked him, said she appreciated the call, and told him she needed more time. What she was thinking about, and she said this later, in a conversation that eventually became widely circulated, was not Preston Caldwell. She barely thought about Preston Caldwell at all. She was thinking about the room. 400 people in that ballroom. Probably 24 who had been close enough to notice what happened at the entrance. At least 6 people at the head table who had seen what happened when Preston Caldwell came around with his handshakes. And in all of that room full of people who were there because they cared. Publicly, professionally, expensively cared about equity and dignity and making things more fair for the people who kept getting left out. Not one person had said a word. Dr. Ewan McAllister, the housing economist from UBC, had given her an expression. A small, sorry look, and then he had eaten his dinner. She thought about her mother, about the uniform pressed before every shift, about the towers downtown where nobody learned her name, about the decades that pass, while everyone agrees things should change, and the rooms stay exactly as they are. She thought about what $40 million meant to an organization, what it meant to have it, and what it meant to not have it. She drafted a letter. The letter was addressed to the Hartwell Foundation's full board of directors, copied to Josephine Tremblay-Cote and Clifford Abbots. It was 2 pages. It was written with the same directness as her speech, and it was specific in a way that left no room for the kind of procedural distance organizations usually put between themselves and accountability. She described what had happened, in sequence, in plain language. She described what she had observed about the room's response. She described what she had come prepared to offer, and what she had chosen not to leave behind. And then she said something that the Foundation's board apparently spent 3 days talking about before responding. She said, "The question is not what one employee did. The question is what the institution allows, and what it notices, and what it decides is worth addressing. And until an organization can show me its answer to that question, is different from what I saw on Saturday night, I don't believe my money belongs there." She also said, "If this foundation is genuinely interested in doing the work I described in my speech, the urgent work, the disruptive work, not the comfortable kind, then I would be willing to have a different conversation. But it would need to start differently than this one did." The foundation's response came from Josephine Tremblay-Cote, not Clifford Abbott's, which Vivienne considered a meaningful choice. Josephine acknowledged everything in the letter directly. She did not use the word misunderstanding once. She described 3 specific internal changes the foundation was already implementing: mandatory equity training for all event and operational staff, a new review process for event management contracts, and an external audit of the foundation's own hiring and promotion data, which Josephine said she expected would be instructive and possibly uncomfortable. She said the board had also voted to name Preston Caldwell's position redundant, effective immediately, and she said, "I hope you'll come back to the table, not because we deserve the chance, but because the work deserves it." Vivienne thought about it for another 2 weeks. She called Dr. McAllister, which surprised him. She told him she wasn't calling to make him feel guilty about the dinner. She was calling because she was deciding whether to continue engaging with an institution, and she wanted to understand what he'd seen in that room from the outside, from someone who'd been at the table. He was honest with her. He said he'd seen it. He said he hadn't known what to do, and that he'd told himself it wasn't his place, and that he'd thought about it every day since. He said he was ashamed of that, and he said it plainly, without trying to explain it into something smaller than it was. She appreciated that. She told him so. She called 2 other people who had been in the room that night: a city councilor, a woman who ran a housing nonprofit in Hamilton. She asked them the same questions. She got different versions of the same answer. Then she made her decision. She called Josephine. She said, "The 40 million is still on the table, but the proposal has changed. There are now conditions. Not punitive, not designed to humiliate anyone, but real and specific, and with timelines. Progress reports, public. Governance changes, documented. A requirement that the foundation's own staff composition reflect the communities it claims to serve, within 3 years, with independent verification." And there was one more thing. She wanted the foundation to fund, separately and additionally, a fellowship program for young Black women from Scarborough and Malvern and Jane Finch who were studying finance and business. Full scholarships, mentorship, placement support. 5 years, 20 fellows per year. Josephine said yes before Vivienne finished the sentence. The partnership was announced 6 weeks later. The press release ran in 3 national papers. The Globe and Mail called it one of the most significant single philanthropic commitments to urban housing in Canada in a decade. The fellow program was named, at the foundation's suggestion, and with Vivienne's reluctant agreement, after her mother, the Vivienne Okafor Fellowship. Preston Caldwell, by all available accounts, was not doing well. After the foundation ended his position, he found it difficult to land comparable work in the Toronto event management world, which is smaller than it looks, and moves information efficiently. He gave an interview to a minor blog in which he described the situation as taken out of context and blown out of proportion, which was perhaps the least surprising thing anyone said in this entire story. He was not Vivienne's concern. What concerned her? What had always concerned her? What her mother had tried to teach her, and what she spent 15 years at that firm learning through the body, through experience, through the specific texture of being overlooked by people who smiled at everyone else, was not any individual act of smallness. It was the room that watched and said nothing, because Preston Caldwell was easy to deal with. Preston Caldwells are everywhere, and they are obvious, and they can be removed and replaced, and the institution can send a press release and feel that something has been resolved. The room is harder. The room is everyone who saw what they saw, and looked away, and told themselves it wasn't their place. The room is every colleague who said nothing, every board member who stayed quiet, every Dr. McAllister who ate his dinner. The room is the thing that needs to change, and it is the hardest thing to change, and it changes slowly, with pressure, over years, by people who refuse to accept its silence as a neutral condition. Vivienne Okafor knew this. She had always known this. And so when people asked her, later, what had made her stay in the partnership despite everything, why she hadn't simply walked away, taken her money to a different organization, left the Hartwell Foundation to learn its lessons without her, she gave an answer that people quoted for years afterward. She said, "Because I'm tired of leaving. I'm tired of the most qualified people being the ones who have to take their excellence somewhere else, while the places that need changing get to stay exactly the same." The Hartwell Foundation has work to do. So did my mother's employers. So does every room in this country that learns to see past someone like me only after it understands how much it stands to lose. She said, "I'm not going anywhere." And that, she said, with a calm that had been decades in the making, is the whole point.